My name is Richard White, and thank you for attending this presentation on cybersecurity metrics development for Board and Risk Committee reporting. Before I begin, I would like to thank RSA for providing this opportunity to me, and I would also like to thank Flushing Bank for supporting me throughout this entire effort. Thank you. Things we're going to talk about today with regard to cyber security metrics, how they're developed, why they're important, and how they need to evolve over time. It's no misunderstanding that board members are holding the CISO, CIO, and CRO more accountable for not having the right information in front of them to make a decision. And in that context, lots of articles, both academic and commercial, are available, and I have two of them that I'd like to provide you if you would like to see them. One is Thycotic.com and the other one is Forbes.com. Both focus on how boards need to have the right information in front of them to reduce risk and influence risk over a period of time. So cybersecurity metrics, before we get into the development of them, we want to learn a little bit about them. Cybersecurity metrics have to have a couple of properties. The first one is utility. Now, all of these bullets on here are things that the board wants to accomplish with cybersecurity metrics, and more importantly, it can help lead to your success, your cyber program's success, and your organization's success. But more importantly, cybersecurity metrics need to be actionable. And without the ability of a board decision to affect cost, maturity, or risk, your reporting may be muted. It may have less of an impact if it's not bucketed right or messaged right with regard to what your expectations are and the reason for reporting that metric. When I was a CISO at the Capitol Police, prior to my arrival, the Capitol Police had very vague cyber metrics, but they didn't want to change them because they were used to them. The chief of police, the deputy chief, the Senate sergeant at arms, they lightly, not pretended, but they lightly understood why the metrics needed to evolve to be more informative and better decision making. But it wasn't something that they had a high degree of intent to apply resources to. So eventually, and I'm going to use this term and feel free to take it away, I applied gentle pressure over a prolonged period of time. I never ceased. I continued to ask questions and continued to describe the benefit of refined metrics. And eventually, I was successful. I'm going to tell you about the feedback later on in the presentation. So when I was the managing director for Oxford Solutions, one of the things that I did as an executive in that organization is I went on CISO for hire calls. I went on bank sites, I went on commercial sites, and I was there to help them fix an audit problem, fix an engineering problem, or generally improve the reporting and viability of their cyber program. Now, I noticed that all of the customers that I went to visit as a CISO for hire, with few exceptions, I can't say 100%, but most of them, they had very similar goals. They want the board to be informed. They want additional funding. They want the controls to be understood. They want to reduce risk, and they want to align themselves strategically with the organization. That was it. Everything else was, I would say, haphazard. The metrics that I reviewed as the CISO on site mostly were inappropriate for decision making. They were interesting and titillating, but they didn't do much in the form of informing the board and how the board can make decisions with regard to cost, risk, and maturity to resolve the problems that were being experienced. So what you see here is a collection of things that I began back in 2013 documentation review, literature survey review, asking questions, and determining the quality of determining the definition of what really determines a quality metric. Now, one of the properties that cybersecurity metrics have to have is clarity. We've already talked about they have to have the ability to be actioned and utility, but they can have all of the utility in the world, and without clarity in reporting, it's difficult to get a positive decision out of any board or committee. Bottom line, a board or a committee is not going to fund or approve anything that they don't fully and clearly understand, that they can discuss amongst themselves with other executives. And in my research with regard to utility and clarity, I really found that the board wants to know three things. Now, this may be different for your organization, but for my organization and the banking industry as a whole, I'm very certain that these things apply and should apply to most organizations outside of the industry that I'm in. Excuse me. They want to know if your cyber program is working. How effective is it at controlling and mitigating threats today? How is it fully staffed? Is it fully resourced? And how effective will it be tomorrow and beyond at protecting from those same threats and more modern types of attacks? So they focus on maturity. Is the cyber program adequately funded? Board wants to know that. Will a dollar figure increase fix this problem? Will the application of skill sets or resources fix this problem? And is it outside of our risk appetite, or is this something we need to take on immediately? Board needs to know that for correct funding. And lastly, is the cyber program reducing risk for the organization, for the key stakeholders and the customers today and proven over time? So what we have there is maturity, cost, and risk. With regard to clarity, I speak and present to my board very often, monthly, as a matter of fact, and we'll talk about that in here in just a second. But in the early days of my tenure here at Flushing Bank, I use the terms mean time to detection and mean time to repair, or resolution. And what that caused when I left the room was a discussion about the meaning of those esoteric cyber metrics. So I lost the benefit of having a board decision. I lost the time that it took to prepare the presentation at that point, and I caused confusion in the boardroom after I left. We'll talk about what that meant later, but in general, I am fortunate to be able to meet with my board on a monthly basis. So taking small course corrections over a 30-day cycle is beneficial, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. Additionally, clarity comes from not only your messaging, why it's important, what they mean, what the benefit will be, but also how they're framed. How are they logically constructed to present a meaningful and cyber-related dialogue? Are they easy to understand, or do you use deep esoteric data that hardly anybody would understand, particularly a senior executive responsible at a board? Now, additionally, the clarity of the message should be such that the board can understand what that cyber metric means with regard to organizational strategy and direction. So understanding utility, understanding the need for quality metrics, understanding the need for clarity, let's talk very briefly about a high-level development process. I showed a slide earlier that had literature review, decision-making, board goals. That was the beginning of kind of putting together some blocks for a process. And what the high level process is that we're going to discuss in the next slide, and really assess where you're at. This is the beginning of evolving your metrics into quality cyber metrics for your board. Assess where you're at. Do the results of the board meet your expectations? Meaning, do you get the right types of results? Do you get the right results that are meaningful? Are they expected and predicted based on how you reported and what you reported? A literature review. Look at existing literature. Look at the governance documents that are charged with regulating your industry. I'm in a very regulated environment, banking. So I need to look at FFIEC, FDIC, NIST, CIS, CSF, and some others from threats from FS-ISAC and a few more. You may be different. And what I'm suggesting here is that gather that literature, have it ready, have the latest version, and be ready to select and define your effort and why you're picking or selecting specific cyber metrics. And that's an effort on the next slide. But also ask questions throughout the development process. It's not just a research and it's not just a documentation and guess. Ask questions. What are your peers doing? What are they doing that works well? What are they doing that works not so well? What can you borrow and how can you link it to what the messaging that you need to convey? And what do you want your board to understand? Ask leadership. Ask individuals who are charged with or have been charged with in the past board effort, board understanding, board reporting. Find out what they report. See if there's a cybersecurity element to it. Ask and provide what your examples are and be prepared to discuss them. And lastly, let's not forget, you can ask your peers and your colleagues and additional leadership, but nothing is more valuable than asking an existing board member. Ask them if your messaging is clear. Ask them if they are getting out of your report what they think you should be providing them. And if it's off, that's a great opportunity to make a real solid and meaningful course correction. The cybersecurity development process in more detail, it really, before I get into this, and I will be brief on this, it's for those of you that are in a regulated industry or not, but you are under audit in some occasion. In my opinion, and it's been my experience, that auditors enjoy seeing policy, board-approved governance, and evidence that you are following a policy and supporting a standard. This process right here will go a long way in satisfying an auditor's curiosity for the better. For example, the FDIC asked me a few years ago, why was I reporting these metrics? Well, I showed them my literature review. I showed them my survey. I showed them how the metrics were derived from the publications, and I showed them how they were vetted against our executive management and our board members. And whether they had a question or a true amount of trouble with anything, it went right away, because nothing is more substantial than doing what you say you're going to do and having evidence to prove it. This process is a way to define and prove to auditors and others that you have a quality process in place that's approved to define your quality metrics. So we've already talked about these areas at a high level. Assess where you're at. You can't begin at the end. You have to start at the beginning. Where are you at? Look for the types of decisions, the types of discussions, the types of questions that you're getting from the board. Is it what you expect? If it's not, assess. Look at why it's not, and can move that forward. Make the course corrections. The second stage is discuss with executive or senior leadership what you're doing and why you're doing it. Why are you developing new cyber metrics? Why are you putting resources and allocating resources into something that we don't need. It's your job to describe the effort, describe what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what the benefit will be. If you can generate a consensus among your initial stakeholders, then you have something to move forward with. If you can't, look at what their feedback is and understand why there's no movement. See if there are better metrics that are more meaningful, or add additional metrics that will provide the depth and understanding that those individuals are looking for. Once you have a consensus on your early stakeholders, continue to do your research, apply their feedback, see and determine if any additional cybersecurity metrics are required. If not, move forward, define them, and move forward to a broader discussion with additional executive leadership. Ask the individuals that you've already spoke with if they could recommend additional folks for you to vet this against. And once you have your fully vetted and approved set of metrics, begin to report on them. Remember that the board meeting is not the time to make or to present new cybersecurity metrics. If you're presenting new metrics at a board meeting, your chances of being successful totally are much less than what they would have been if you would have had a consensus against a fully set of vetted cybersecurity metrics new. Additionally, once you get to this fully vetted cybersecurity metrics, you can take a little break, but you've just really started the process. Metrics stagnate. Metrics need to evolve. The industry changes, organizational direction and strategic visions change. The cyber program needs to be able to flex with those requirements. The regulated bodies change. And you need to report those metrics in a way that shows alignment, continues alignment, and gives the board the opportunity to prove and see evidence that there is alignment through cybermetrics. So that was a great segue, because now I want to talk about the actual rotation or evaluation of existing metrics. I'm not claiming that developing cybersecurity metrics is easy. In fact, it's difficult, but all it takes is commitment and pressure applied over a period of time. Right and correctness will always float to the top with the right meaning and conversation behind it. So I want to skip over quickly the frequency of reporting, because I want to get back to that. I want to end the slide with that. But to evaluate your metrics, again, you're just looking at the same questions you already have to develop them. Are they generating discussion? Does the board use them in a meaningful way to make decisions against maturity, cost, maturity, and risk? Do the follow-up questions from the board, are they meaningful? And are they what you expected? Are they discussing the fundamental elements of the metric, or are they discussing the benefit of understanding that metric and applying an action to it, like cost, maturity, or risk? Additionally, are the metrics that you're presenting, or do they continue to be actionable? Metrics today are today. They're fresh, they're new, they're providing the right type of output, and it's an oiled machine. However, over time, as I stated, organizations change, leadership changes, regulating bodies and requirements change, direction changes, and what was once a very actionable metric early now becomes difficult to make a decision on because it's no longer applicable, or as applicable as it once was in the past. So keep that in mind as you have this core set of metrics and you're documenting them and you're framing them for continued discussion. Now, I report to my board monthly. I find that very advantageous. Why? Because a 30-day cycle, if something doesn't get input I have only 30 days to wait to have another decision or a new understanding. It's critical, and it lends itself well to my success and my cyber program's success. Some of you watching this may also report monthly. However, I bet it's a bigger and a better bet that most of you report semi-annual or annual to your board. And that would determine by your executive leadership, the board and the guidance principles that the board operates under. But few of you have the opportunity to report monthly. And I think that when you have a short turnaround between board meetings, i.e. a 30-day cycle, you can make smaller, more meaningful course corrections, as well as I have access to the management team, the senior management team, and the board members much more than somebody who reports annual to their board would. And I don't mean that as that one is better than the other, but for me at this bank in this organization, reporting monthly to the board and getting that output on a monthly basis and understanding what they're understanding is key to continued alignment with the organizational vision. So I had a survey, and I did some analysis, I did some coding, and I put out a lot of surveys, and I asked a lot of questions, and I had some help from friends, and we put together a fairly comprehensive set of cyber metrics. The group of people that I focused on really naturally evolved into three categories: colleagues who provided operational experience, tactical experience, for example, the type of vulnerability that was exploited, how long was it exploited, was there any lateral movement, what did the logs indicate? Those types of very in the weeds, technically esoteric type of metrics. In contrast, those in academics really focused on providing feedback and metric suggestion that was in the areas of interest or areas that they currently taught or have past taught or are currently teaching. And they tended to focus on administrative, like policy and procedure, risk analysis, auditing, and the elements that go with the administrative and administrative safeguards for a healthy cyber program. Valuable feedback, but big difference between my peers and those in academia. In contrast, the board, when I reached out to board members in past organizations that I have served at, and current, as well as the board members to reach out to and get their feedback, it was nearly, not 100%, but nearly all focused on risk, cost, maturity, and risk. And I thought that was very telling. So in case you haven't picked it up yet, the very core theme, other than quality metrics for this presentation, is board members want to hear the metrics reported in the categories and context of how does it affect cost, how does it affect health, maturity, and how does it impact risk? So what makes a good metric a good metric? First of all, let me kind of describe them to you, what my core cybersecurity metrics are. I'll see if I can do it from memory. Some of them were mean time to detection, containment, resolution, as well as the results, not the number of pen tests or vulnerability scans, but the results and the criticality of the findings for the vulnerability scans and the penetration tests. In addition to that, employee training on how susceptible we were to phishing attacks, how phish prone was this organization. Also, risk assessments and overall cyber health and audit findings were very key to board members overall, but they really focused on, those are the quality metrics that I have, but really all of them can be described and categorized within the big buckets of cost, maturity, and risk. So I thought that was very interesting, and I thought it was leading me down a path that I thought from early on or midway through that was correct and meaningful. So what makes a good metric? Metrics that can be used to understand organizational need and risk. Understanding if the cybersecurity program aligns with and informs organizational strategy, and it speaks directly through any vehicle to cost, maturity, and risk. So the key here is that the board, it's the general consensus of my effort that board wants to hear certain things. They want to hear it in certain categories, and they want to hear how those areas, cost, maturity, and risk, apply to the organization through the metrics that are reported. Again, the considerations for the board are key, but in order for the board to make any consideration of any cyber metric, it has to be clear and it has to have a high degree of utility. They need to review company controls and peer performance. That's through cyber metrics. How well and how effective does a cyber program protect against, identify, and respond to cyber incidents? How well does the program protect us today, and how will it protect us tomorrow? What is the state of compliance? Do we have any material weaknesses or weaknesses that have been identified by an audit, internal or external, state or federal? And how do we ensure the board needs to know that the projects within the cyber program or information security, the roadmap to the future, is aligned with what the organization vision is and the strategic vision of the organization. We want to be able to protect against the threats that we will encounter both today and tomorrow. And the cyber program should be able to provide evidence of that. And the board needs to see that evidence and be able to understand it in a layman, very meaningful decision-making manner. This is some of the high-level results. Like I said earlier, I wrote down, I don't know, probably 300 or 350 cyber metrics. This is a result of what the high-level categories were. Most of my metrics fell into one of these buckets. And this was before. I'm showing you raw examples of raw things right now. But if you look closely, you can see the cost, you can see the maturity, and you can see the risk throughout. That's not accidental. That is what the finding is reporting, and that's what the metrics that I was gathering, as well as the metrics that I had discussions about with other board members, other CISOs, and other executives. So this demonstrates that the process is valid, and the collection of these metrics at the time, I think it was 300 or 350, can be boiled down into very meaningful discussions and be used for effective decision making if they're presented logically, meaningfully, and framed correctly with each other prior to and during the board meeting. So what have we heard, and what do I want you to take away? There are a lot of things. We talked about clarity and utility and development processes and times and difficulties and things that may take more commitment than other administrative efforts that have been undertaken. But to get started, it's simple, but it just takes the staying power and the commitment. So after you leave, after you conclude this presentation and you think about metrics, the first thing, and you want to move on a path of quality and improved metrics, take 2 weeks to understand the effectiveness of the decision-making output. Is the board telling you what you expected, or are they way off? If they're way off, though, that may be a problem with the metric or the message or the logic and the frame with which they're presented. So you need to develop a framework to present metrics. Are you using something that's predefined? Are you using something that a colleague used? Whatever. That is completely up to you, and there's no one framework I would recommend over the other. But to present your metrics in a meaningful and logical manner, framework is required. I would consider using cost, maturity, and risk as the biggest top buckets and pull everything out from there that you feel you need to report on, as long as there's a map back up to one of those categories. Now, I also am going to ask that you look at the existing documentation for your industry. For me, it's FFIEC, FDIC, FSI SAC, CIS, CSF, and a few others. It may be different or maybe the same for you. But while you're going through that, gathering the documentation, looking at what's available in the literature, I would like you to consider, and this is not written down here, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It is ATT at K, and that's attack tools and techniques and knowledge base. And it's a collection, a very well organized collection of all of the attacks that have been observed from a cybersecurity perspective for a very long time. So the chain and the organizational components to what bad guys do and what tools they use and what their impact could be and what type of results they're looking for. Clearly, you can see the application to defining cybermetrics. Now, when you first look at it, it's going to appear complex, but if you spend a little bit of time, you'll see that it's very valuable. It's free. They're on version 8.2. It is very modern and very updated, and I highly recommend that you look at it for your first phase. Now, if you look at it and you don't find anything applicable to your board report, you should contact me so we can discuss it, because I can't 100% guarantee you, but I would be interested in finding a board report as applied to the MITRE ATT&CK surface and not being able to find a quality metric that should be derived. That is for you, and I'm happy to chat about it anytime. 4 weeks out, you should continue to review the literature sources, define what metrics you've already selected. Why did you select them? What are the benefit of this metric, and what do you think the intended understanding will be of the board? Once you have that written in some format, reach out to key stakeholders that are considered colleagues or friends, but have the same insight and understand the key elements of what you're trying to accomplish. Tell them what you're doing. Tell them what you think the benefits are going to be and get their feedback. Listen to it and incorporate it, because what they're providing you is their insight into board mechanics and what the board discussions are and how you can get in front of those types of discussions. I recommend reaching out to the CIO and the CRO. You may have other titles in your organization, but select an executive that can provide you the feedback that you need. So 2 months and beyond, 2 months to 3 months, you need to refine and validate the metrics that you gathered. So you've had these discussions, you've did these categories, you've applied raw cybermetrics into these categories, you've incorporated feedback. Now provide that back to your key stakeholders that you initially spoke with, and then ask for their opinion on who you should reach out to next. You want to end with a very broad audience that can help vet, that can help generate consensus and generate dialogue so that you're not presenting new cybermetrics at the next board meeting. And beyond, three months and beyond, continue to push, continue to document, and continue to go through those steps until you get to where you need to be. It won't happen overnight. In most cases, if it does for you, fantastic, and I congratulate you. But in most cases, it's going to be difficult to get on board members' calendars. It's going to be difficult to explain the the premise and the benefit of what you're doing in the time frame maybe that's been allotted, but that should not be a reason or a rationale to end the effort. Continue to apply gentle pressure over a period of time, and you will, truth and logic will prevail. You will be successful. So in summary, we've talked about quality metrics. We've talked about the importance of metrics. Why does the board need metrics? Well, they have to, quality metrics. They have to make effective decisions that impact the organization wholly. Clarity and utility are key items in helping the board members understand your point of view, why this area is important, and more important than all, what they can do about providing a solution. Also, you want to ensure, or at least make a solid attempt to aligning your cybermetrics with the big frame categories of cost, maturity, and risk. Board members understand that, and you want to speak their language. And if you can map a cybersecurity element to cost, maturity, or risk directly in non-esoteric terms, you're going to have a better result for the board. It's been proven to me and to my colleagues that have adopted similar styles. We talked about a process for developing quality cybermetrics. Assess where you're at. Look at it for what it is. Are you getting the right type of output from your board? Do your board members have questions for you that are focused on results and not about the metric itself? If so, the messaging or the clarity may be in question. You may need to revisit that if it happens frequently and the same questions continue to come up. We also talked about the addition of other elements, metrics from outside of your organization that may be applied from other industries into your industry. It's not an issue. Be flexible to look at other industry documents and look at what cybermetrics they are suggesting and see if there's a linkage. Understand if there's something that can be beneficial in your report to your board members. And the last thing is, once you go through the understanding and the development of all of this, the process, the writing, the discussions, and the evaluations, you're not done. You really just begun, because remember, your organization matures over time. Directions change, standards bodies and requirements change. The threats make pivots and change. Your cyber program and what you report should also change. And if you have an issue with the frequency of change or the frequency of refinement or evaluation, ask. Get feedback from the board. Ask if your board, your new rotated in cybermetrics are meeting the mark and they're getting out of it what you expect them to get out of it. That's all I have. It's been a pleasure to present the cybermetrics presentation to you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at rwhite@flushingbank.com. I'm happy to provide the articles. I'm happy to provide the raw cybermetrics. I'm happy to provide examples of refined metrics and board reports. Of course, they would be redacted, but I would just show the framing within my report. But I'm happy to share that. If I can benefit you or it can help just one organization, I would be extremely happy with that. Thank you very much.